So I want to tell you a story today. It's a story about a verdict that was already written. A moment where the cold, hard math said it was all over. But reality? Yeah, reality had some very different plans. We're going to look at how something can be completely finished on paper, but still very, very far from over in real life. Okay, so let's set the scene. I want you to picture this. It is exactly 11:42 in the morning. The date is January 27, 1945. At this very moment, there's an American B-29 bomber flying at 28,000 feet over Japan, and for all intents and purposes, it's already dead. And I don't mean just damaged or in trouble. I mean dead. That was the official verdict from the United States Army Air Force's command, sitting miles and miles away from the action, and the single word they used was somehow colder than the air outside that cockpit: unrecoverable. Which brings us to the big question, right? How? How can a machine be officially written off, its story literally finished in a logbook, while the crew is still up there, thousands of feet in the air, fighting for their lives? Well, let's dive into that. So, what did unrecoverable really mean? You have to understand, this wasn't some wild guess. Oh no, this was a conclusion. It meant the math had already been done, all the probabilities had been calculated, and a final, completely emotionless judgment had been reached. This right here, this captures the bizarre split-screen reality of that moment perfectly. On one side, you have the view from command. The plane's just a statistic, a story that's already over. But on the other side, the reality in the air, a crew still fighting, an aircraft that is very much still flying, deep inside enemy airspace. It's like two completely different worlds existing at the exact same time. Now, to really get why they made this call, you have to understand the thinking at the time. This wasn't about hope or gut feelings or even heroism. This was about doctrine. And it was about the cold, unforgiving laws of physics. And this is the absolute key to the whole thing. Back in 1945, the entire system was built on rules that came from countless data points. The manuals, the training, the whole shebang. It was all designed to make the best decision based on probabilities, not on the individual bravery of any one crew. Doctrine mattered more. And that doctrine, it was based on some brutal physics. See, for a B-29, losing two engines on the same wing wasn't just a small problem. It was a catastrophic cascade of failures. Your stall speed skyrockets, which means you have to fly way faster just to stay in the air. Flying faster burns fuel at an absolutely insane rate. And you start to lose your ability to even steer the thing. The manuals were crystal clear. A descent was inevitable. Period. The main gremlin they were fighting against is something called asymmetric thrust. Just imagine you're trying to paddle a canoe, but you only have one oar, and that oar is a massive superpowered engine. The plane is just desperate to flip over and spiral down. The crew's entire job becomes this full-body, non-stop workout just to keep the wings level. But here's the thing. The verdict wasn't just about physics. It was also about economics, about strategy. It was a really grim calculation of assets. So when command wrote that plane off, it was a totally pragmatic decision. It was essentially an order. Do not risk any other planes or crews trying to save it. That asset is lost. For the massive war machine, the system simply had to cut its losses and move on. I mean, to put that into perspective, get this. A single B-29 cost about $600,000 in 1945. That is an astronomical sum of money. We're talking about the modern equivalent of a small fleet of fighter jets. This was a massive industrial asset.
And then, of course, there was the human cost. A highly trained crew of 11 men. Every single one of them represented months, if not years, of investment in training and expertise. You couldn't replace them.
And finally, just the sheer scale of the thing. We're talking about 70,000 pounds. That's 32 tons of aluminum, steel, fuel, bombs, and men, all hurtling through the sky. When the mast said it was going down, the loss was absolutely monumental. And this is where our story really takes a turn. Because for all the data and all the doctrine and all those grim calculations, the verdict was wrong. There was a flaw. Not in the math itself, no, but in its timing. This is the part that gets me every single time. That unrecoverable verdict, the one based on losing two engines, was issued before the worst of the damage had even happened. The situation was literally about to get catastrophically worse, and yet the final outcome would prove that initial verdict completely, utterly wrong. This timeline just lays out the incredible irony of it all. At 11:42, the bomber is declared finished, But for the men inside, the hardest part of their fight hadn't even started, and that official, data-driven verdict, well, it was about to be proven spectacularly wrong.
And this quote, man, it just perfectly captures that disconnect. Think about it. It's a sentence, just typed out by someone safe on the ground, miles away, closing the book on an aircraft whose crew is just about to enter the most difficult, terrifying chapter of their entire lives.
And so what we're left with is this incredible idea. It's this powerful reminder that data and doctrine, they can tell you what should happen, but they can't always account for what will happen. Because history, as it turns out, just loves to do this. It issues a verdict way too early and then just sits back and waits to be embarrassed.
So let's talk about the B-29 Superfortress. This thing was a technological marvel, an absolute beast of an aircraft that was designed, really, to be untouchable. But over the skies of Japan in 1945, its entire strategy, its core doctrine, just shattered, and it led to this horrifying new kind of warfare. This is the story of how a perfect weapon met a really brutal reality.
You know, this right here, this was the promise. This was the line sold to thousands of young airmen flying out of these bases in the Pacific. They were told, hey, you're piloting a fortress that flies above the war, a machine so advanced the enemy just can't reach you. And for a while, everybody, and I mean everybody, believed it.
Okay, so what was this whole doctrine of invincibility built on? Well, it all came down to a really simple but powerful idea: altitude. The entire design philosophy of the B-29 was to get it so high, so far up, that the fight would be over before it even really began. 28,000 feet. That was the magic number. I mean, think about it. At that altitude, you are way above most of the anti-aircraft fire, the flak. You're higher than most of the older, conventional fighter planes could even hope to operate effectively. This was supposed to be the B-29's shield, just this big cushion of thin, cold air separating it from all the chaos down below.
And look, this wasn't just wishful thinking. It was backed by some absolutely incredible technology for the time. You had a pressurized cabin, which meant the crew of 11 could operate for hours without those bulky, exhausting oxygen masks. The guns, they were remote-controlled. I mean, a futuristic system of periscopes and computers. And those 4 massive engines were specifically built to perform up there in the thin air of the stratosphere. Everything was engineered to own that high ground.
But here's the twist. The first thing that started to tear this beautiful doctrine apart wasn't the enemy. It wasn't some new fighter or a new type of anti-aircraft gun. No, it was the sky itself. The very environment that was supposed to protect the B-29 turned against it.
It's a pretty fascinating question, right? You can engineer a machine to overcome your enemy, but what do you do when the battlefield itself becomes a weapon? Because over Japan, American planners ran into something they just hadn't fully prepared for: the jet stream.
Yep, over 100 miles per hour. We think of the jet stream as something that might make our flight a little bumpy today, but for the B-29 crews, it was a raging river of wind. This wasn't just some nuisance that threw you off course a bit. It systematically took apart the B-29's entire defensive strategy, piece by piece.
Now, what's really interesting here is how this shows a chain reaction, like dominoes falling. First, the wind is so strong it just blows the bombs way off target. So to compensate, the bombardier needs more time, which forces the pilot to fly straight and level for longer and longer. And that, right there, is the fatal mistake. A bomber flying straight and level is a sitting duck. The jet stream literally turned an unpredictable bomber formation into a totally predictable shooting gallery.
So the B-29 is now predictable. And on the ground, the Japanese weren't panicking. Oh no, they were adapting. They were learning, and they were waiting. They knew the Americans were coming, and they had an answer ready to go.
This is such a key shift in tactics. We have this image, right, of fighters scrambling to intercept a surprise attack. That is not what was happening here. Japanese radar would pick up the B-29 formations from far, far out. The air raid sirens in Tokyo would be wailing before the first bomb bay doors even opened. At the airfields, pilots were already in their cockpits, engines warming up. It wasn't a scramble, it was a well-oiled routine.
And this just brilliantly illustrates where the American doctrine quietly broke. The assumptions were just flat out wrong. They believed any fighter that could climb all the way up to 28,000 feet would have to be slow and lightly armed. But the Japanese had the Ki-44, nicknamed the Tojo, an aircraft designed for one job and one job only: to climb like a rocket and kill heavy bombers. 8 minutes. That is it.
From the moment a Ki-44's wheels left the runway, it could be at the B-29's safe altitude in under 8 minutes. The entire American strategy was built on this illusion of time and safety, and this one little number completely erased it.
Just think about what that means for a second. The B-29s, they're up there fighting the jet stream, forced to stay on their predictable bomb run for minutes at a time. The Ki-44 pilots, on the other hand, they're arriving with plenty of time and plenty of fuel. They weren't just getting one quick, panicked pass. They could set up, they could coordinate, and they could make multiple, devastating attack runs. That intercept window was wide open.
And what was it like for the crew inside that B-29?
Well, the promise of high-tech comfort just vanished up there. Those remote-controlled gun turrets, so advanced on paper, would literally freeze solid in the extreme cold. Gunners were struggling with oxygen deprivation, their minds getting foggy, their reactions slowing down. They were fighting not just the enemy, but their own technology and this absolutely brutal environment.
Okay, so you've got a failed doctrine, a brutal environment, and a surprisingly effective enemy. The result? Catastrophic losses. And those losses forced a new, horrifyingly logical strategy, not from the Americans, but from the Japanese. Just look at these numbers from January 1945. 31 B-29s lost. That's over 300 crewmen gone. In just one raid over Nagoya, 5 bombers were shot down in less than 20 minutes. This wasn't just attrition anymore. This was a clear signal. This was the battlefield sending a message back, loud and clear. Your strategy is broken.
And this is where the story takes its darkest turn. Japanese pilots began to deliberately ram the B-29s. But it is so critical to understand why. This wasn't a religious or fanatical act in the way we often think of kamikaze attacks. No, this was a cold, calculated decision based on what the source material calls desperation arithmetic.
The whole point is right here on this slide. Let's just do the math. The Japanese trade 1 fighter and 1 pilot. In return, the Americans lose a B-29 Superfortress, a $600,000 machine back then, and its entire crew of 11 highly trained airmen. From a purely tactical point of view, that exchange rate is a massive victory for Japan.
And that's really the core idea of this whole explainer. These pilots were using their own lives and their own aircraft as guided missiles because the math worked. They were answering a failed American doctrine with the only logic they had left. It was a brutal, desperate, and horrifyingly effective calculation.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? When a perfect plan, a perfect piece of technology, smacks right into the messy reality of war, everything changes. The story of the B-29 over Japan is just this powerful reminder that in warfare, sometimes the only thing that matters more than your strategy is how quickly you realize it's failing.
All right, let's get right into it. In early 1945, if you looked up at the skies over Japan, they were supposed to belong to 1 plane and 1 plane only, the B-29 Superfortress. This thing was the most advanced bomber on the planet, built around this idea of high-altitude bombing that was meant to make it basically invincible. But what we're going to talk about today is how that whole doctrine just shattered against the realities of wind, an enemy they totally underestimated, and, well, some horrifyingly cold math.
And that right there, that was the core belief. It was the promise sold to every single crew member flying out of Saipan. You see, the B-29 wasn't just a bomber. It was supposed to be a fortress in the sky, operating way up where no enemy could possibly touch it. But, as we're about to see, a promise made on paper can get torn to shreds by the harsh truth of what's happening in the air.
So let's start with the plan. Why was everyone so sure this would work? Well, it all boiled down to one really simple, really powerful idea. Altitude is armor. The entire strategy was built around flying so high that the war would literally be happening thousands of feet below them.
Now, what's so interesting is this number right here, 28,000 feet. That wasn't just picked out of a hat. No, this altitude was specifically calculated to put the B-29s above the effective range of most anti-aircraft guns on the ground, and way higher than older, less powerful fighter planes could really operate. It was meant to be their personal sanctuary in the sky. In this confidence, it wasn't just talk. It was backed by some seriously incredible tech for the time. I mean, pressurized cabins? That was a huge deal. It meant crews could actually function for hours up there without passing out. It had remote-controlled guns, a truly state-of-the-art defense system, and those 4 beastly engines were designed to just keep it cruising steadily in that thin, freezing air. Every single part of this plane was engineered to live up to that promise being untouchable. But
perfect theories have a way of falling apart in the real world. And the first crack in this armor, well, it didn't come from a Japanese fighter. It was something the planners had tragically, fatally underestimated. That's right. Before the B-29 crews even had to sweat about enemy cannons, they were fighting a war against nature itself. Because high over Japan, they flew straight into one of the most powerful and unpredictable forces on the planet, the jet stream. Just think about that for a second. A literal river of wind screaming past them at over 100 miles per hour. This wasn't just a little bit of turbulence, it was an invisible weapon that was actively working against them, powerful enough to throw the entire mission into chaos. And here's how that invisible enemy created a very visible, very deadly problem. First, the intense wind would just shove the bombs hundreds of yards off target. So to compensate, the bombardiers needed more time, which meant the pilots had to fly straight and level for longer and longer on their final approach. This turned these amazing flying fortresses into slow, predictable targets, almost like they were on a conveyor belt. The Japanese fighters, they didn't even have to chase them anymore. They just had to fly to the right spot and wait for the B-29s to be delivered right to them. So the jet stream basically kicked the door open. But the thing that came walking right through that door was an enemy that American intelligence had gotten completely, disastrously wrong. An enemy that was about to shatter that last little bit of the illusion of high-altitude safety. This is where the American doctrine really just falls flat on its face. The assumptions they made seemed logical, but they were dead wrong. They figured any fighter that could climb that fast would just guzzle fuel and maybe get one pass at them. They thought any plane carrying heavy cannons would be too slow and sluggish to be a real threat. But the Japanese Ki-44 interceptor? It was none of those things. It was fast, it was heavily armed, and its pilots were learning and adapting with every single mission. And this is the number that changed everything. 8 minutes. That is all it took for a Ki-44 to scramble from its runway and climb to 28,000 feet. The B-29's entire shield of altitude, the very foundation of its strategy, could be totally erased in the time it takes to brew a pot of coffee. The sanctuary was gone. And the results of being so wrong? They were brutal, and they were immediate. By the middle of January 1945, the losses were just staggering. 31 B-29s, these incredibly expensive, complex machines, were gone in a single month. And far, far more importantly, over 300 crew members lost. This wasn't sustainable. This was hard proof that the doctrine had completely failed. This catastrophic failure, it forced a change. But not just in American tactics. On the Japanese side, it led to a brand new strategy, one born not of fanaticism, but of cold, hard, desperate math. And that brings us to this crucial concept, desperation arithmetic. See, when Japanese pilots started ramming B-29s, it wasn't always some pre-planned suicide mission. It was often a tactical decision made right there in the heat of battle, based on a simple, horrifying calculation of cost versus benefit. And this table right here, it lays out that grim calculation perfectly. Just look at the exchange rate. You're trading one of your fighter planes and one pilot for one state-of-the-art B-29 Superfortress and its 11 highly trained crewmen. From a purely military point of view, if you're out of ammunition and out of options, that trade, it makes a terrifying kind of sense. And that right there, that's the key takeaway. It's so important to separate this tactic from the organized kamikaze strikes we often hear about. This was different. This was a direct response to an overwhelming technological threat, where the value of a single B-29 was just so enormous that the most extreme measures suddenly became logical. It was math, plain and simple, born from sheer desperation. Ultimately, the story of the B-29's high-altitude doctrine is just this powerful cautionary tale. It forces you to ask, what happens when our most brilliant strategies and our most advanced technologies collide head-on with forces we can't control and an enemy we refuse to truly understand? Well, the answer, written in the skies over Japan, is pretty clear. Reality always gets the final vote. Today, we're going to focus on one single, absolutely harrowing moment of survival, pulled right from the chaos of aerial combat. This is the story of one bomber's desperate fight for its life after it was left damaged, all alone, and being hunted. And that's really the core of this whole thing. This isn't just about the machine, it's about the people inside it. Because when you're at 30,000 feet and everything is going wrong, the most important system you have is the human one. So let's see how that choice played out. Okay, so let's set the scene. You've got a B-29 bomber, and it's crippled. It's fallen out of its protective formation, which means it's lost the covering fire of all the other bombers. It's losing altitude. And for the enemy interceptors circling nearby, well, this is the perfect target. It's like a wounded animal separated from the herd.
And just look how fast this all goes down. At 12:27 p.m., they're officially on their own. By 12:30, just 3 minutes later, the first fighters are already on them. And then, only 4 minutes after that, the entire nature of the fight changes completely. We're not talking about some long, drawn-out battle here. This is a brutal, lightning-fast struggle just to stay alive.
I mean, this single line from the source material, it just says it all, doesn't it? The second that bomber was isolated, the mission for the enemy completely shifted. It wasn't about just intercepting a bombing run anymore. It was about making sure that this aircraft and its crew never, ever made it home. But the threat from the outside, that was only half the story. While this insane fight was raging all around them, a second, quieter, and maybe even more dangerous battle was happening inside the bomber's own systems. Just try to put yourself in that cockpit for a second. You're over 30,000 feet up. The temperature outside has plunged to 50 degrees below zero. The air is so thin and so cold that your oxygen mask is literally frosting over with every breath you take. In conditions like these, just staying conscious, just staying functional is a victory in itself. And this, right here, shows you the domino effect that was happening. The B-29's advanced computer-assisted guns were supposed to be its saving grace, but the extreme cold started a chain reaction. First, the hydraulic pressure plummets. Then, the lubricants in the machinery start to thicken up, almost like molasses, slowing everything down. And the result? The automated fire control system starts to lag. In just a few moments, all that advanced tech has failed them, and the crew is thrown back to basics, forced to aim and fire those guns entirely by hand. So what happens next? Well, it turns into these incredible one-on-one duels in the sky. With all the automated systems failing, it all comes down to the raw skill in the pure nerve of individual gunners against incoming fighter pilots. Can you imagine being that gunner? You see the first fighter diving in from above and to your right. The distance is closing at a terrifying speed. You can't trust the computer anymore. Everything, absolutely everything, depends on your eyes and your timing. And this creates this agonizing decision. You've got mere seconds. If you fire too soon, you're just wasting precious ammo. But if you fire too late, well, you don't get a second chance. The pressure is just immense. And boom, he nails it. The gunner holds his nerve, he waits, he fires at that perfect moment, and the fighter flies directly into a stream of bullets. One threat down, an incredible, hard-won success. But they don't even get a second to breathe. There's no time to celebrate. A second attacker is already there, and he's smart. He's exploiting the bomber's blind spot, climbing up from behind where it's hardest to see and to target. And just like that, the crew reacts again. The tail gunner opens up, stitching rounds right across the fighter's wing. You see the aluminum peel away, the plane shudders, it loses control and just falls out of the sky. 2 attackers, 2 kills. An absolutely incredible display of skill under fire. So, 2 attackers down, an unbelievable bit of flying and shooting. But the fight was far from over. The enemy pilots, they were learning from these failures, and they were about to change their whole strategy, from individual passes to a coordinated, overwhelming assault. Remember that time from our timeline? 12:34 p.m. Yeah, this is it. This is the turning point. The sky, which had just held these individual duels, suddenly becomes very, very crowded. And make no mistake, this wasn't just a chaotic free-for-all. As the source material makes crystal clear, this was a calculated tactic. The pilots timed their attacks to overlap, coming in from multiple angles all at once. They knew that a single crew, especially with failing systems, couldn't possibly track and defend against everyone at the same time. This was designed to break them. And the result is absolutely devastating. The bomber is just getting hammered. Cannon shells are tearing through the skin of the plane. The plexiglass windows shatter, and that brutal -50-degree air comes screaming into the cabin. A whole compartment loses pressure. The aircraft is literally coming apart around them. Now, this is the point where the author asks us to just take a step back and reflect on what this moment truly was. It's so easy to turn these stories into heroic myths, but the reality? The reality was something else entirely. On the left, you've got the myth we all know from the movies, right? Heroic music, perfect shooting. On the right, you have the reality that was described in the text. This wasn't clean or heroic. It was pure chaos. Guns were overheating, crewmen were fighting numbness in their own hands, and just shouting to be heard over the roar of it all. And that right there, that is the ultimate takeaway. This crew wasn't dominating the sky. They weren't action heroes. They were just surviving, second by agonizing second, fighting against impossible odds with everything they had left.
So it all comes down to this one question, doesn't it? This whole event was a stress test, not just for a machine, but for the people inside it. When all the advanced systems designed to protect you are stripped away, what's left? What remains is skill, it's teamwork, and it's that simple, profoundly human choice to work, not to panic.
You know, some stories become legends, not because of some great victory, but because of what a single, brutal failure manages to reveal. This is one of those stories. It's about a mission that changed everything, not by succeeding, but by somehow surviving the absolute impossible. And it gets its name from this final, bizarre moment in a desperate air battle. A moment that, well, it wasn't what it looked like at all. Right, so forget everything you've seen in the movies about air combat. This wasn't cinematic. This was the shriek of alarms, the violent shudder of the airframe, and that slow, grinding realization that your plane is literally coming apart around you, while the enemy just keeps lining up for another pass. So we're gonna jump right into the middle of the fight. Picture this, 20,000 feet up, a lone bomber, already damaged, gets ambushed. The sky just erupts in a coordinated attack, and the crew inside has only seconds, literally seconds, to react. And things happen so fast it's almost hard to track. At 12:38 p.m., the attack kicks off. Just 1 minute later, the first two enemy fighters are gone. But not from gunfire. They actually collided with each other trying to get into position. And that collision, it proved something vital. Even crippled, this bomber was an incredibly dangerous target to attack. 6. In just 2 minutes, 6 enemy attackers were taken out. 6. But, and this is a big but, it came at a tremendous cost. The bomber was now severely damaged, it was losing altitude, and the fight, well, the fight had really only just begun. So inside that plane, they are just fighting to stay in the air. Their airspeed is dropping towards a stall, ammunition is almost gone, and every single system is just screaming under the strain. And the craziest part? This is their situation before things get really bad. Okay, so this is where the battle completely changes. The enemy pilots, frustrated that their guns aren't getting the job done, decide to do something desperate. They're going to use their own planes as weapons, and that kicks off a terrifying new phase of the attack. Let's be crystal clear about what this is. This isn't an accident. It's a deliberate tactic. The pilot makes a conscious choice to not pull up, to not survive the pass. The only goal is impact. It's a horrifying shift from a gunfight to a straight-up suicidal charge. So the first one comes in level. No weaving, no dodging. The gunner sees it coming and knows exactly what's about to happen. The sound isn't described as an explosion, but as this deep, metallic concussion, like a freight train hitting a brick wall. The fighter slams into the number 3 engine, and just like that, the right side of the aircraft starts to die. And there's no time to recover. Almost immediately, another fighter commits from the other side. This time, it hits the number 1 engine. The impact rips a 6-foot hole in the leading edge of the wing. Fuel is spraying everywhere. The bomber is now a crippled wreck, being held in the air by nothing more than sheer will and 2 incredibly overstressed engines. This was the new reality. Only 2 engines working, altitude plummeting, the wing itself is compromised, and the guns are falling silent as they run out of ammo. The aircraft was flying on borrowed seconds. For all intents and purposes, it was already lost. It just didn't know it yet. So, with the bomber now basically defenseless, 4 more fighters line up for the final kill. They're planning to ram it, one after another. The lead plane accelerates, and then its engine just quits. It overheats, it fails, the plane slips under the bomber, and just falls away. No shots fired, no heroic maneuver. The 14th kill wasn't a kill at all. It was a random mechanical failure that just ended the fight. The shooting is over, but the battle is far from it. Now the chaos of combat gets replaced by a new, colder enemy, physics. A long, silent struggle against simply falling out of the sky is about to begin. The entire mission just pivots. The fight is no longer external against other planes measured in seconds. It's now internal. It's a math battle against the aircraft's own limitations, gauges, not guns, fuel, pressure, and time, all measured in excruciating hours. And the math was just brutal. They needed about 11 hours of flight time to get to safety. The flight engineer did the calculations. They had less than 9. The numbers just didn't work. There was not enough fuel. And every single person on board knew it. So they make this unbelievable, desperate bargain. They decide to restart an engine that they know has no oil, fully aware that it will tear itself to pieces. What's the goal? To trade the certain destruction of one engine for just under 30 minutes of extra thrust, and maybe, just maybe, enough range to survive. After hours of just nursing this dying machine across the ocean, they make it. They can actually see the runway. But the aircraft has one final failure waiting for them, setting up a landing that is going to be anything but routine. Just let this number sink in for a second. Over 30 tons of metal. And as they get close to the runway, their last engine quits. They are now in a glider of that immense weight, with zero power, basically just falling towards the Earth. So these were the final conditions. Total engine failure, which means no power. With the hydraulic shot, not all the landing gear would even come down, and there was no going around for a second pass. This one attempt was everything. The landing was exactly what you'd expect. A violent, screeching, controlled crash. The left gear collapsed, the bomber spun sideways, and the sound of metal screaming went on until friction finally won. The aircraft was a total wreck, but from that wreckage, 10 men climbed out alive. So why do we even tell this story? It's not for the kill count, it's for the lessons this one flight forced the military to learn. Its real importance is in all the assumptions it completely shattered. This one single harrowing flight proved that a lot of the prevailing doctrines were just plain wrong. High altitude wasn't some magic shield if you were facing an enemy determined enough to ram you. By surviving, this crew delivered an undeniable message that forced a total, brutal reassessment of air power strategy. And this really frames the whole story. I mean, on paper, the mission was a failure, right? The plane was lost. But was it really a failure? Or was it an incredibly costly, but absolutely vital strategic lesson that was brought back by the survivors? And that really is the ultimate takeaway here. This flight mattered precisely because it was a disaster. It was one of those moments that forces a painful but necessary rethinking. It's a powerful reminder that progress isn't just built on victories, but on surviving our worst failures and having the courage to actually learn from them.